Yeah.
Hi, Sian. Welcome to Ethical Brands for Fashion Revolution 2020. Here we are on Friday and we're talking activism in fashion. So you're the ideal person to have here. Do you want to tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi Jo, thanks for having me. Hi everybody, my name is Conway and I'm the founder of Ethical Hour, which is the world's first and largest membership community for big Y business founders. So we help people that are committed to people, planet and profit to grow their businesses and have a positive impact in the world. And I'm an ethical marketing strategist. My background before I started Ethical Hour was in corporate marketing, so running large international campaigns, and really focusing in on user behavior, customer behavior, what makes people buy things, but when we're buying things, we're taking action. So all of those principles can be applied to activism. And through Ethical Hour, we have a big digital platform, we have a weekly Twitter chat, we have a lot of online networking, and we engage in a lot of digital activism. So we bring together the ethical and sustainable community of business owners, consumers, and activists and people that are just generally interested in these issues, and we create awareness campaigns, and we also elevate other campaigns. So Fashion Revolution is a perfect example of an existing activism campaign that really works because communities around the world come together. So we're keen on elevating those messages, getting involved, and really inspiring people to take action for positive impact for people and planet.
Brilliant. And it's interesting that you say about activism and marketing, because obviously marketing is used by large brands, organizations, governments, NGOs, everybody, to try and get us to buy things and change our behavior, and also maybe to not buy things or not change our behavior. I mean, there's been a big marketing campaign going on to stay at home and not go out, and all of that is marketing. But I think people think that often it's to do just with selling things, don't they?
Yeah, so marketing really encompasses marketing, brand building, advertising, and sales. So all of the things that companies do to try and get us to buy a new car or upgrade our phone or buy a dress or some makeup or whatever it might be. But really, the principles behind that are behavior change. So it's psychology, there's a lot of science in that, it's a lot of understanding human behavior and what motivates us to do what we do. So you can absolutely apply behavior change to getting people to stay at home because the pandemic is happening, getting people to follow the rules and follow guidelines. There's a lot of psychological research about what will motivate us to do that and what won't motivate us to do that. And then that's rolled out into messaging, and then obviously that then becomes the television adverts that we're seeing. If you turn the radio on at the moment, there's adverts about staying at home. Even the press briefings and the things that the government are doing to stay in contact with us, that will have an element of marketing in it, in that they will have advisors and experts kind of talking to them about how to communicate. We're really talking here about communications and behavior change, and that absolutely applies to activism in terms of how do we get people involved in movements, but then how do those movements themselves create change? Because you might be trying to create change by influencing the government or influencing a company, or having action as a collective voice, but really it's all about understanding behavior change. Because even if you are speaking to a body like a government or a company, you're still speaking to people. And it's exactly the same in marketing. Even if you're in what we call B2B, if you're a business trying to sell to another business, you're still a human trying to sell to another human, and selling really is just influencing behavior in a certain way.
And that's interesting for me in particular as a brand owner, and I'm sure for other people watching this, you're actually you have to do all of that in conjunction with knowing who it is that you're trying to influence, don't you? So so different groups of people will have different, what we call trigger points, won't they, for what is actually going to cause that behavior change. So for example, where does it come from? We're looking at really people over 30, ladies over 30, women over 30 normally. So they're going to have a different trigger point than, say, a 15-year-old.
Exactly. And the foundation to any marketing strategy, so whenever I work with a brand on their marketing, the first thing you do is identify who is your target audience for this. Who are you trying to influence? Who are you trying to sell to? And actually, what you mentioned there was kind of demographic information. So their age, their gender, possibly their location would come into that, things like their income levels, all of those kind of things. So you would start with that kind of profile, but actually what would make that much more powerful, and what I know you've done, Jo, and what brands need to do, is go deeper than that into the kind of psychoanalytical side of things. So instead of just saying, you know, they're women in this age bracket who earn this much money and are interested in XYZ, actually what we need to understand is what problems are they experiencing. Because when we buy something, so if we just look at marketing in general, and then we'll look at how this rolls out into activism, but when we make a purchasing decision, we only ever buy what we need. So you might buy frivolously, you might be buying, you know, fast fashion, you might be buying a new lipstick, you might be buying a new car, you might not necessarily need that for your survival, if you think about the hierarchy of needs and the way that kind of builds up, but you will convince yourself that you need that product. Yeah. So let's say, for example, you've got a job interview, you might convince yourself that you need a new red lipstick to feel really confident going into that job interview. And the reason you will convince yourself about that need comes from the advertising messages, comes from society, comes from all different influential factors, but you won't ever buy that lipstick until you have decided, you've linked it to that emotional need. I need to feel my best, I need to feel confident, I will feel that by buying this product. So that's where the marketers come in, and they identify, what does this woman really need who's going to buy this lipstick? She needs to feel confident, she needs to feel XYZ, she needs to see messages that tell her this lipstick is going to achieve that for her. So it might be a perceived need, it might be a fictional need, it might be an actual literal need, that you do actually need that thing to survive, in which case it's going to be a relatively easy sell. But that can all be applied and should be applied to activism. So if we're trying to get people involved in campaigns for the environment, for workers' rights, whatever it may be, if you think about all the different ethical and sustainable issues, to get somebody involved in that, we need to make it really personal to them. We need to make them understand why they need to get involved, why it has a direct impact on their life. It's a really lovely story that as a brand in your supply chain, everybody is paid fairly, everybody is looked after. You know, that's real feel-good factor, but that's not going to be compelling enough to make somebody buy your product over something else. So we need to bring it back to them and really make that story and make that need personal to them. And it's exactly the same in activism.
So moving on then to different activism marketing campaigns, let's just have a look at a few and see if we can look at the marketing behind that. I mean, the key one, as we both mentioned, is Fashion Revolution, and it is Fashion Revolution Week. So what do you think about that as a campaign, and what have they done really well, and who are they aiming at?
So I think one of the cleverest things about Fashion Revolution has been the Who Made My Clothes hashtag, and the way that they've enabled what we would call in marketing user-generated content. So if we were planning a social media campaign for your brand and I was working with you as your marketing strategist, we would look at leveraging user-generated content, which is content that your audience, your customers are creating for you, because obviously it's cheaper, it's less time intensive, you don't have to go and hire a photographer to do a whole photo shoot and so on. But the power of user-generated content when it comes to activism, slightly different. Obviously the same kind of thing, but it elevates that message and it gets people involved and it creates personal buy-in. So if I am actively, so there's a couple of ways they could have gone with this. So let's say they want to target one of the big fast fashion brands and they want to know who made my clothes. They could have set up a change.org petition to that brand saying, you know, demand that this brand tell us these various different points, and then they could have got us all to sign that petition. And if you think about all the people that share their selfies and get involved and hold up the signs and do all of that, that petition would have got a lot of signatures, and then they could have mobilized it. So that would have been effective, and there is a time and a space for that. But the way they went was actually, let's get people to turn their garments inside out, to show their label, to take the selfie, to tweet the brand, to write to the brand. The people are doing the legwork. But what is happening then is, if I tweet a brand saying who made my clothes, I'm then personally invested in getting an answer. Yeah. So I'm not going to let them off the hook. So, okay, 100,000 people could sign a petition and we could go to the brand and say, look, 100,000 people want to know who made my clothes. Are you going to tell them? But the pressure point would only be us with the petition. The people involved in the petition have then exited the process. So okay, some of them will keep up with it, some of them will chase it, but most of them will sign that petition and move on with their lives and feel good, feel like they've done something, but actually the impact might never come to pass. But leveraging your audience, leveraging the community voice, leveraging the user-generated content around Who Made My Clothes, not only does it give the campaign massive reach, because think about all the followers of all the people that are sharing that content that will then get involved, but actually it leverages the pressure where it needs to be on the brands, on the people that are needing to be held accountable. So I think there's a lot that we could learn from that in other areas where sometimes we do just default to, we'll start a petition about this, or, you know, we'll do a protest march about this. Actually, I think they've been the first people to really leverage digital activism in a really powerful and effective way to kind of almost to its full potential. I mean, I think there's loads more that we could do, and you know, the possibilities, the creative possibilities are endless when it comes to digital. But I think for me, Fashion Revolution just stands out as one of the best examples of digital activism that there is.
Interesting. We had Eliseo Lovejoy on earlier this week, and she was talking about, it fits in really nicely with what you're saying, all the different levels of customer that they're aiming for. Yeah. So they're talking about, there's people who, as she phrased it, as a journey. There's people that are early on in their journey, they don't know anything about the area, they've never thought about it, so they're just buying fast fashion because it's cheap, and they've never had anything in their lives to make them think about it in a different way, all the way through to people who know a lot about it. And it's trying to target campaigns that will work all along that group. But she basically said that they only do digital. They don't create any content that isn't digital. They don't put. I think one of our audience asked them about putting billboards up and things on bus stops, and she's like, we don't do that. We only do things that are digital. So they're very, very clear with who they're aiming at, different stages of the journey, and how they're going to reach them.
Exactly. And I think there's a few things in there. I think the fact that they're leveraging user generated content so much then empowers other people to come under the Fashion Revolution banner and put on events like this, put on the events that we've done in London in the past to mark the week, obviously when we were allowed out of the house. But we've talked about this on those panels at those events in the past, that actually the average person on the street assumes that their clothes are made by robots. You assume that you can go and buy a dress for £10 and wear it once and throw it away because a robot made it. And that's a really common misconception. And I think that certainly for me, when I started learning about ethical fashion and learning the truth about fast fashion, the biggest shock, I think, was actually the fact that I'd never even thought about the people involved in making my clothes. And obviously then that comes with a whole host of guilt and shame, because we're human and we feel all the emotions. It possibly comes with anger towards the brands for almost exploiting you and your lack of knowledge and your lack of kind of willingness to look into that. So there's a big emotional pile-on, and what happens then, those in a traditional marketing sense, we would call those the objections and the fears, and we would do work to overcome that in the sales process. But actually that can stop us from taking any action. That can stop us from buying. It can stop us from getting involved. It can stop us from feeling good enough to be involved or feeling like we belong in that space. So what it does with this Who Made My Clothes message is actually a very simple but very complex thought process behind it, and complex way that it works psychologically for us, because it gives us the permission to ask, and it gives us permission to explore it, and it almost alleviates that guilt and that shame and all of those emotions that go into that, of like, why didn't I know this before? You know, how did I get to, I mean, personally I was about 24, so how did I get to 24? I'd been consuming fashion since I was 14, 15, so 10 years as a fashion consumer, and I'd never once thought that actually there's a woman sat somewhere sewing my clothes. Like, obviously there is, but how have I never thought about that?
Yeah, no, that's so true. And funnily enough, we had this same conversation earlier in the week with Izzy McLeod from the Funky Environmentalist, and she had a great phrase, I think was it cognitive dissonance, I think it is.
Yeah,
you can actually you can actually not want to think about it. Your brain, your psychology is making you not answer these difficult questions because you don't want to be upset. And I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, a simple question, who made my clothes, is just a question. There's no guilt or anything attached to that, is there? So it's very interesting. So it's a good.
You think visually as a campaign, they use bold, bright graphics, they use colors. There's not actually, if you look at the kind of visuals, because obviously branding and visuals is a big part of marketing as well, because we're visual creatures. That has a really strong impact on our subconscious, which is a big part of our decision making process. So your branding and your visuals are extremely important. But if you compare Fashion Revolution to, say, PETA, they they do use graphic images, graphic videos. I mean, personally, I absolutely love animals. I support all the animal rights campaigns and charities that I possibly can, but I have to hide them on Facebook because I just find it so graphic. I just can't cope with it. It's a very different style, but actually the bold graphics and the lack of using images and sort of using photos and presenting it in that way, it's very hard to ignore and it's very easy to digest. So you almost don't have the option of opting out. Whereas if you see a video that you know is going to have some sort of horrific scene from a factory farm or something, you can very quickly scroll past it, you can very quickly opt out, and you can very quickly give yourself permission to opt out. And I think if Fashion Revolution were using images from sweatshops, they were using images of child labor, which we know are out there, we know the truth, we know it's very heartbreaking, it's really difficult to see and engage with, that is what we're trying to change. But actually, by not showing us that, it's not allowing ourselves as consumers of that messaging, as activists getting involved, it's not giving us the room to give ourselves permission to opt out and say that's not for me.
No, it's really interesting. Though, funny enough, one of the campaigns I loved that Fashion Revolution did a few years ago was they had the vending machine. I think it was in Berlin.
Yes.
I love that one. And so they'd say, "Oh, t-shirt for £2, anyone?" And you go, €2, and people could go up and put their €2 in. And then then it played them a video, only about a minute or something, of people working in the sweatshop and said, "These are the people who made your t-shirt. Do you still want it, or will we contribute the money to our campaign?" And apparently everybody contributed the money. So it's almost like having that captured audience, and they put the money in, so they'd already committed to it somehow. So it was very clever. Anyway,
I think creatively it gets you talking about it, it's memorable. I think that's a really big part of it as well, because the key to successful activism and community movements is actually recruiting other people. So you want something that is shareable, especially in the age of social media. You want things that have got viral potential, but that get people talking and that are different, that are something we haven't seen before, that you want to tell people about.
Yes, and that's another thing I was going to say about the "Who Made My Clothes" thing, because it is actually educating as well, isn't it? So you'd be quite happy talking around the dinner table of saying, "Oh, did you see this thing about who made my clothes?" And I learned that my clothes were made, I looked at the label and I saw it was made in Bangladesh, whatever. Whereas if you had a PETA video with animals, it was very unpleasant, you maybe wouldn't feel the same wish to share it, would you?
Exactly.
Exactly. Okay, so we talked about Fashion Revolution, which is not a surprise because here we are in Fashion Revolution Week. I was trying to think of some other big campaigns that have happened for ethical fashion, just so we could explore them and maybe compare them. I mean, one of them is the 6 items challenge, where you have 6 items that you choose from your wardrobe and you only wear those 6 items for 6 weeks. I don't know what you think about that one.
So I think this is an interesting one in terms of how it's actively changing your behavior as someone who's engaging in the challenge. So I think challenges are really popular anyway. I think this probably could be leveraged further on social media. And if you think about, in lockdown at the moment, I don't know about you, but I keep getting tagged in this run 5K, donate 5K, nominate 5 people for the NHS. Well, you might be one of my 5 people that I tagged, Jo. You're supposed to go out and run 5 kilometres or walk 5 kilometres and then donate £5 for the NHS and the COVID-19 response, and then tag and nominate 5 other people, and then they do it and then it spreads. So a really famous example of this was the ice bucket challenge a few summers ago, where we were pouring ice over ourselves. So, they have the viral potential. It's that fun element of getting your friends involved in things. I haven't really seen that with the 6 items challenge. I think it is more individual, and I guess part of that is the thought process that has to go into picking what your 6 items are and things. But I think as a concept, it's very powerful, because what it does, if you ever take part in it, it really makes you think about what's in your wardrobe. It really makes you, I think the idea of having a capsule wardrobe feels very aspirational, but something that, I could never do because I've got so many clothes. I'd feel like I have nothing to wear. I couldn't mix and match and things. And I think it plays into some of the trends that we've seen, like the Marie Kondo effect and minimalism and all of those kind of things. So I think it's very of the moment. It's a very easy, accessible way of getting into kind of capsule wardrobe and really thinking about your clothes. And it's good because it's making you actively do that behavior while you're taking part in the challenge, rather than just talk about it. So obviously, if we're saying who made my clothes, we're not necessarily, as people saying that to the brands, following up with not buying from that brand and changing our brand behavior. That's not inherently built into that as an activism campaign. So I think this is a good next step to actually taking some practical action. But I think it could be leveraged further with that kind of viral potential, with that kind of community participation and things. I think it's interesting to see how these campaigns roll out and kind of who takes part in them. One thing I have noticed with that one is there's a lot of ethical fashion bloggers that do it and then talk about their experiences and share their advice. So it is very accessible in terms of, if you want to do it and you want advice, there's a lot of advice out there. But I think that could be leveraged further.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, maybe there's an element of people who only they will survive 6 weeks on 6 items. Maybe they then learn that which of the items of their wardrobe that they actually are wearing more than any other item.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
As you say, it's a longer term way of reaching behavior change, but it's quite an interesting one.
Yeah.
And then the other one I found was the one around no new clothes for a year, which I know Jen Gale has done. And then recently, Deborah Meaden from Dragon's Den has just been posting about that as well. So not buying anything new for a year. I don't know what you think about that.
So I think this is a really interesting one, because again, it kind of feels a bit unattainable for some people. If you are, I mean, if I think back to the height of when I was buying fast fashion every week, I would never have dreamed of not buying any new clothes for a year. I probably could do it now because I buy a lot of secondhand and things. I personally feel a bit conflicted with this one, because I think the message is good that we need to be slowing down consumerism, we need to be buying less overall, but I think it risks us being seen as kind of the extremer end of the environmentalism. And if you think about environmentalism in general, there's still a lot of negative stereotypes, not just in fashion about kind of what ethical fashion looks like, which we know is not true because it comes in all shapes and sizes and colors and beautiful fabrics and styles and things. But I think particularly in terms of shaking off that kind of angry hippie stereotype, I think it's very important that we talk to specific groups to be able to engage them. But I think when you start pigeonholing, and naturally as humans, we want to pigeonhole people into certain groups. So if you are not the type of person who is inclined to really get involved in environmentalism, or, you know, you're a climate denier or whatever, and you just know that's not for you, you don't want to be involved in it, but you're triggered to feel that shame about your behavior, it's then very easy to write off that whole group of people as well. They're just, you know, angry environmental hippies. I don't need to engage with them because they're not my people. So I think as a challenge, it's very good on an individual level for getting us to slow down, stop buying. Obviously, it has a really positive impact, not just on the environment, but also on your finances.
Yes.
So I think it is a really good challenge to do. But I think as an overall campaign, it does risk making it look more extreme. And we've seen this with Zero Waste Week as well, and the kind of the discussion around Zero Waste Week, you know, when it got to the point where influencers were sharing their whole year's worth of waste in a mason jar, and there's a certain element of privilege there, there's a certain element of unattainability there that risks us being pigeonholed as not that important, not that mainstream, not for everybody. So I think we need to be careful when we're doing these campaigns that actually we maintain accessibility to different communities, to different people, to people that wouldn't necessarily. I think with Fashion Revolution, what I like is, as you said, it's accessible to people at all different stages of their journey. Whereas I think the Buy Nothing New, although it's brilliant when people do it, and it's really good as a discussion point, again, around the dinner table, you know, it's great. People love to hear, well, how did you get on with it? What was the hardest thing? People have a lot of questions, they're curious, but that curiosity comes from inherently that idea that, oh, that's not something I could do. It's not something I could do. So I think, you know, the message that we want is everybody needs to buy less. If we all buy less and we all buy better, then everything will improve. So we need to make this as accessible as possible. So for me, that campaign is a little bit problematic. And obviously there's a very big difference between fast fashion brands releasing 24 collections in a year and exploiting the people in their supply chain, and smaller brands like you who are really supportive of the people in your supply chain, doing everything right, doing everything possible for the planet. And actually, if small businesses like yours aren't supported, they're not going to be around anymore. And what we're going to be left with is the fast fashion giants. So I think we do need to be mindful that if you're not buying anything new, you're also opting out supporting small, independent, ethical businesses.
Yeah, and that is a really good point, because that's something that we find is, where does it come from? And also, I know other ethical brands I've spoken to, we almost feel a dichotomy between, we're saying to people it's really important where you buy your clothes and try to cut down what you're buying. Oh, and by the way, we think you should buy from us, and you almost feel guilty as a brand saying that, whereas your message is actually buy better, buy less, but buy better. Choose the brands that that can tell you the story, and that it's good quality and made effectively, kind of thing, made kindly. But yeah, no, that's really interesting. And that made me think of, when you were talking, quite a lot about veganism, because I know a lot of vegans get criticized, I suppose, for being a little bit too much in your face, whereas Veganuary this year, I actually did Veganuary this year, and doing it for a month and then coming off of it again after a month felt right, because you did this thing and you felt good about yourself, and you also learned a huge amount. So I've never gone back to milk in my tea again since then, and I've cut down hugely on the amount of dairy that I eat. And it is cutting down, really, rather than cutting out, is the way to make change, isn't it? So maybe it's the same point. It's cutting down on your new clothes for a year is just too much for people to think of, but maybe if it was for a month, or I don't know, only buy from ethical brands or something like that, it would work.
I like that approach of it being a detox. And I think the rise in veganism becoming, I don't like to use the word trend, because that suggests that it's kind of coming and going, which I know it's like a lifestyle choice for people, but obviously it has become a lot more popular. It has become trendy. So if we separate out trend and trendy, it has become much more popular. I think Veganuary was the biggest this year it's ever been, and they said the same last year, and then obviously this year it was bigger. But that's a really interesting one, in terms of, if you look at how brands in that space are marketing themselves and how they're shifting their marketing, they've gone from being very, very niche to becoming a little bit more mass market. That market is opening up for them. Lots more people are interested in trying vegan products, but the language they use and the messaging and the positioning, if you notice, a lot of them focus more on plant-based rather than vegan, because there's this idea that you can have a plant-based diet but not necessarily be a vegan. So you might eat plant-based but not, you might still wear leather, or you might eat plant-based 90% of the time and then sometimes have a little bit of dairy, or you might even just do meat-free Mondays. But I think it's that idea of making it more accessible. And you're right that actually veganism is one movement where there really are negative stereotypes that are starting to come down now, and I think things like Veganuary really help. Wider campaigns like the climate emergency are really helping with that, because people are seeing it as a good way. People that haven't necessarily been motivated by the animal welfare message that has dominated that space for years are now being motivated by the climate message, and actually shifting slightly away from the vegan terminology and language and shifting more into the plant-based terminology has helped marketers and advertisers capture that market that are interested in plant-based diets, veganism, because of the climate rather than the animal welfare side of things. So it's very, very interesting to study how marketers position things, how they angle things, how they word things, how they brand things. All of that is really, really carefully thought through, really carefully analysed, tested, looking at user behaviour and really understanding the psychology behind behaviour change. So that actually there's so many crossovers between how we can use marketing to create movements in activism. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. No, honestly, you and I, when we get together, we can talk for hours about these things. And it's so lovely to have you as a guest, because obviously the last few years it's been you and I, the dream team, doing these events with the lovely Liz as our event manager. But this year, because we're online, it's all slightly different. So it's so lovely to have you here and have you involved. And I know we're going to be working together again really soon. We've got an event coming up, haven't we? Do you want to tell people about that?
Yes. So I'm back for this conference on Sunday, doing a section on thought leadership in ethical fashion. So that's a little bit different to the activism. That's a little bit more, I like to think of thought leadership as a bit more gentle, whereas activism, again, stereotypes that we're all angry activists out there with our placards. So do come to that session if you want to find out more about some of the things we talked about today. And then if you are an ethical brand that's watching this, Jo and I are running Future Fashion Focus 2020 in May. So this was an event that we did last year, and it was brilliant, wasn't it, Jo? We had really about 50 brands in the room. So Jo, as you all know, because you've all been watching the seminars, but Jo is a real expert in transparent supply chains, in kind of embedding those values and those ethics and all the things we've just talked about. So Jo does half of the session around that and helping you really embed your impact. And then I do half of the session around identifying exactly who your target customer is and what messaging you need to reach them, sell to them, and stand out in that sea of greenwashing. Because one thing we haven't talked about in this session is that obviously all of these behavior change techniques, all of these tactics are unfortunately being commandeered by the fast fashion brands, and they are using it to look greener than they are. And that's probably a separate rant for another day.
No, hopefully we're going to cover some of that in our panels, which are also going to be shown today. So that is quite a key one, I think. How marketing can be used, maybe not quite so positively, but that's another thing. So I think that the date of Future Fashion Focus is 7th of May. And how can people get tickets for that? How can the brands get tickets for that if they want to buy tickets?
So we have a link on Eventbrite, which will we be able to share that link, Jo?
I'm sure I can put it in the comments, but also if you go to the Where Does It Come From Facebook page or the Ethical Hour Facebook page, there's an event there that you can link through to Eventbrite from there as well.
So Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Ethical Hour, #Ethical Hour, you'll find it on there. Get my plug in there, do a bit of marketing.
So that's absolutely brilliant. I hope that everybody's really enjoyed that session with Sian Conway from Ethical Hour and Jo Salter from Where Does It Come From? So I can get my plugs in too. And I'm sure there'll be lots of comments in the chat box, which I will capture and relay to Sian so that we can answer any questions directly. So
and if anyone has any questions, feel free to tweet me at Ethical Hour on Twitter, and I will get back to you.
And do come along and join the Ethical Hour Twitter chats on a Monday evening at 8, because they're brilliant. There's always so many people there having a good old chat about various issues. Okay, I just say a really big thank you to Sian for coming along and joining us, and we will see her again on Sunday. Thank you, Sian.
Thanks, Jo. See you Sunday.
See you Sunday. Bye.
Bye.